am your host, Rob Etayan. Joining with me are some familiar faces and a very special guest. You might know him from WEEI, or if you're a Celtics fan like myself, and all of us, you probably follow him over there on X. And Justin Turpin, thank you so much for joining us. We got two Justins here today, guys. This might get confusing.
Thanks for having me on, boys.
Of course. And before we get started, I think it's only right. You are the star of our post-game shows. I mean, I got your Twitter or your X on. You can ask anybody on Reload. I love what you do over there. So I just want to give props to you before we get started.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that.
Oh no, thank you, man. You give us all.
You're like our Dick Lipe here. That's
exactly.
That is my inspiration, man. That's who I'm trying to be. That guy is a machine.
Absolutely. So guys, let's get started here. Obviously Celtics post All-Star break here, looking to start the second half of the season hopefully a back-to-back championship repeat here. They're going to start tomorrow night against Philly, guys, but it kind of feels like they entered that All-Star break on a high note, following what was probably the lowest of notes that we've seen under this core regime now for the past year and a half. Justin, for you, you see the Celtics play at such a high level for almost a year and a half, it felt like. And then the dog days show up and the Celtics kind of start doing this whole win, lose thing. For you, you look at that for a team that's been so successful. Is that something that you're worried about? Is it going to creep back up, or should that have been expected?
It should have been expected. And I think they're out of it now. They made it a point heading into the All-Star break to be playing some of their best basketball. And it's safe to say they are. They're heading in there, winning 7 of their last 8, 11 of their last 13. So they're in a pretty good spot. And I keep going back to when they were in Golden State and Steve Kerr and both Steve Kerr and Steph Curry were asked about it. And they said, this is totally natural. Like when Steve Kerr says that, like that's somebody you listen to. That guy did it with Michael Jordan, and he's done it with Steph Curry. And I don't think he was just throwing that out there. I think he was sincere about that. And if you look at all these past champions that have tried to repeat, the Lakers did this, the Bucks did it, Golden State did it. It's so hard to play that level of basketball that they were consistently night in and night out. Because last year they were trying to prove what they can do. Now they've proven that. And you're asking all these all-stars and these high-caliber players to bring it every single night. It's just not reality. They know what they can do come the postseason. And for now, they've been just trying to see what they can get away with and still winning games. And, for them to be on pace for 58 wins and doing that is pretty impressive. 58 wins last year wins you the East by 8 games. So they're in a good spot.
All right. And I feel like that's kind of, the question right now regarding the Celtics team was, did the league catch up to them, right? Are the competition, is the field better than what we saw last year? I think for me, you might look at Cleveland and the moves they've made, Oklahoma, Denver, New York, they've made some, big time acquisitions. And you might think to yourself, guys, okay, maybe the field has gotten a little bit more competitive. However, you look at Boston, it kind of feels like now they're still kind of that team, no?
Well, the one thing too with that is they had the entire team. They brought the entire team back. So They have all this film with them. They played 101 games last year. So they have 101 games of film to prepare all summer for this team. This is the team to beat. So I think that is part of it.
I think you look at a team like Cleveland, and I kind of was a little bit not on board with Cleveland. They didn't really make too many offseason moves. But in their defense, this is a Cleveland team where I think they've been this good. I think their problem has been, quite literally, their injuries. They have been such an injury-prone team. Evan Mobley hasn't been able to stay healthy. Jared Allen, obviously Donovan Mitchell. We saw him injured in that Cleveland series last year. I believe it was the semifinals. We matched up against them. So injury-riddled teams for sure. I think the talent in the Eastern Conference certainly has gotten better, especially in those top teams. Obviously, Karl-Anthony Towns going to New York, and we see a healthy Cleveland Cavaliers who just acquired DeAndre Hunter, which we're going to see how that fits at the deadline. And just before we hit record, obviously Javonte Green. So that's two really solid backup wings that Cleveland was lacking, and that's what they went out and they got in the trade deadline in the buyout market. So you got to give props to them. But the Celtics certainly have some competition this year. But I think the Celtics were just so – oh, girlfriend's calling me. I think the Celtics were just so dominant last year that these expectations are well over our heads. And so it's like if we don't win by 30, it's like, oh my gosh, the sky's falling. It's really hard to blow out teams in the NBA. The Celtics had 3 50-point wins last year. 3. That's never been done before. And if it has, I think it was way, way back then. But this Celtics team was so dominant last year that we look at some issues this year and we're like, ooh, I don't know. Can we go back to back? The Celtics have kind of leveled themselves out going into the break. I think 10 of their last 13 games they've won, and they've looked really good doing so, especially picking up some big wins, guys. Before we hit the All-Star break, Cleveland, New York, Philly, those are some really solid wins for this Celtics team.
Well, yeah, Justin. I mean, for me, I have a question for you because Justin just mentioned it, and we've kind of talked about it here a little bit on the program. But we've seen a nice stretch before the All-Star break, 7-1 record in the last 8 games going into All-Star break. But was there a particular game within that stretch? Because there were quite a few games in that stretch where you could look at it and go, okay, the Celtics, are they turning this ship around a bit here? So for you, was there any game within that stretch that you looked at in particularly as a singular game where you went, okay, this team is kind of going towards a different direction than what we've seen in both December and January?
Yeah, I think it's 2 that Justin mentioned there. I think Cleveland was number 1 and then New York number 2. To go on the road in both of those games, and Cleveland, they had a double-digit lead for most of the game. And the thing is with this team understands it, and I think fans are starting to understand it too. There's no such thing as a safe lead anymore, especially double digits. Just the way the game is played, the pace and 3-point volume. So when Cleveland made it a game, it wasn't really anything to fret. Like, that's to be expected in today's NBA. Right. But when they did, Derek White took over and he really got going. And I write about it all the time, and I'm really vocal about this. When they're playing well, Derek White is almost always at the center of it. So when he lights up like that in the fourth quarter in Cleveland, it's like, man, this team is back when Derek White is back. So that was probably the number 1. And then number 2 is New York, because that team, it's just funny. That team has no shot against the Celtics. I was crunching the numbers the other day. They played 2 games, obviously. In those 2 games, New York has led for 46 seconds. 46 seconds. They spent all summer retooling to compete with Boston. You ship out 5 first-round picks from Mikal Bridges to compete with Boston, and you can't even get a lead. Like, that's hysterical to me. But the Cleveland one would be the answer to that question.
Yeah, the New York game, I don't know what to tell Knicks fans at this point in time. I mean, you made all these offseason acquisitions. You're supposed to go up against the Boston Celtics. But honestly, if you look at the New York Knicks squad, we were explaining this on the postgame show a couple of games ago that New York, they just don't really look like a team that's offensively capable of really staying with the Boston Celtics, because they do have the defenders to sort of match up with the Boston Celtics. And now you could say, well, this is where we really want to break it down here. Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson, those are your 2 best offensive options if you're the New York Knicks, yet they're both defensive liabilities for the New York Knicks against the Boston Celtics. Whereas if you're looking at OG Anunoby, you're looking at Mikal Bridges, you're looking at Josh Hart, those are really your main defensive options to throw out guys like Brown and Tatum on the Boston Celtics. But then those guys are all kind of they're at a deficit on the offensive end of the floor in terms of being creators for themselves. So you kind of have a deficit within that New York roster, whether it's with the 3 guys who are mainly defenders, not so much offensive creators, but then you have the 2 offensive creators who are not really mainly defenders. You kind of have a little bit of a weird balance there within the starting lineup. In New York, they're so top heavy right now that you look at their bench and go, if they have to mix and match with the Celtics, which this is always so big in the NBA playoffs, is how many different styles of ball can a team throw out, and how many different looks can they throw out during a playoff series? Because the Celtics, they can go to many different looks within their lineup. You think about the versatile big man rotation. You think about Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, what they're able to do as forwards. You look at the guard rotation of the Boston Celtics. The Celtics can really mix and match their lineups, as we've seen all season long, whereas other teams, if they have to play a specific style of play, well, if that style of play is compromised by the Boston Celtics, then ultimately they don't really have too many other places to look at. So that New York game, definitely for me, that New York game stuck out because New York was relatively healthy. OG Anunoby, of course, didn't play that night. But New York they're a team that really, like you said, I love that stat you just threw out, how they've only led the Boston Celtics 46 seconds
I
this
think that's what
season?
it was. I mean, I'm just going off the top of my head. It was under a minute. I can tell you that for sure. 46 was sticking, so we're gonna go with that one.
I mean, regardless, under a minute. I mean, 2 games, and both of the games too. It's like what the lead was probably at the beginning, and then the Celtics pretty much just ran
Right.
away with the rest of the game. And there's a clear problem there with the Knicks. But yeah, the Cavs are a little bit scarier of a team. I would even say they're scarier now with the news that just broke before we came on here, that Javonte Green is going to be joining the Cleveland Cavaliers. But again, the Cavs kind of have the same problem in the sense of there's multiple guys that you can attack on the Cavs roster if you're the Boston Celtics. But of course, they did make 2 deadline acquisitions in DeAndre Hunter, now Javonte Green. That one's a buyout acquisition after the deadline. But do you see Cleveland as a legitimate? Now, this question, I will say, is a question where you could say, yeah, of course, a team could beat the Celtics in any given series, any given day. But do you see Cleveland having the horses to actually race with the Celtics this season, even after the DeAndre Hunter acquisition and Javonte Green signing?
I don't, and I really don't. And I think DeAndre Hunter, if you look at his stats against Jason and Jalen, that's who you're going out and you're getting a wing stopper. He can't stop them. If you look at his numbers against them, I mean, they've had their way against him. I mean, you look at these Cleveland games, right? The first one when they broke their undefeated streak, Boston had a double-digit lead for almost the entire game. And like we were talking about earlier, Cleveland made a late push, which to be expected. Boston held on. The second one, when they lost, Donovan Mitchell had 25 points in the fourth quarter. Is that going to happen?
We were also up
again?
15 in that game.
They're up 15 in that one. And
Peterson
Donovan
game.
Mitchell explodes for 25 points in the fourth quarter. If you need 25 points from Donovan Mitchell to beat this team, it's not going to happen 4 games out of a 7-game series.
Well, we saw it last year. Remember, game 1, it was all Donovan Mitchell, and they fell short. Right. I mean, and I remember saying that in the postgame show. I said, if they're going to so heavily rely on one guy, Donovan Mitchell, go ahead, let Donovan Mitchell go off. It's like Jordan in the 80s, right? Like Celtic, let Jordan go for 60, contain the other guys, and that's something that you could see with this team.
And that's part of it too, is they're going to let Mobley and Allen take any of the 2s they want. Right, so if you want to trade those 2 for 3s, we can do it. It's just no team in the Eastern Conference really matches up with them. And I hate to sound like that confident and cocky, but the film shows it. If you just watch those games back, it's so apparent that none of these teams can match up with them.
Is there a sleeper team to you right now? I know you said no team could match up against the Boston Celtics, which is completely agreeable here, but is there a sleeper team right now other than the Cavs and the Knicks? Because we talked about the Cavs and the Knicks a ton. I think those are the 2 obvious ones in terms of the standings and how they've geared up to really beat the Boston Celtics. But is there a sleeper team right now in the standings that could potentially make their way up the standings and maybe threaten the Celtics in your mind?
Detroit.
I would say the Pacers. I mean, you look at that Pacers series last year, they're a couple bounces away from being down 3-1 in that series. Thank God for Drew Holiday, because, man, I don't know where they would have been without him. So I'd say the Pacers for that one.
I feel like when you're looking at and really the league, there's there's two tiers of teams you got to look at, right? And there's the tier in the Eastern Conference that are the teams that record-wise can match up with Boston, right? Like the Clevelands, the New Yorks. I mean, maybe Milwaukee, just because of Giannis. There always has that question mark. Oh, you got a Giannis. But it's okay, they can't match what Boston does offensively and defensively, right? The 2-way versatility Boston presents with their top 6 is just unmatched compared to what you see in the East. And then you look at the top guys out West. Okay, who threatens Boston in a potential finals series, right? You got Oklahoma, you got Houston, you got now maybe LA, even though I think they're probably a year or 2 away from really being there. And then you got Denver, right? Exactly. But then really, it's okay, the top guys out West, well, they don't have that experience. Boston's going to have that experience factor, kind of like what you just mentioned, Justin, against Indiana. Those bounces. I mean, that was the experience of the Celtics finally coming through. They finally found a matchup where they had that experience.
I love that you brought that up, because if they are to play the Thunder or the Rockets in the finals, I compare it almost to the 2022 finals, where Golden State was the team that had been there and done that, and Boston was not ready. Boston could have won that series. They should have won that series, for being honest. And they didn't, because Golden State had been there. They were experienced. They knew how to handle it. They had guys like Clay and Steph and Draymond. Now the Celtics are looking at it like we got the Jays, Kristaps, Drew and Derek, the guys that have been there. So I look at it like if any of those teams in the Western Conference, if it is the Thunder or the Rockets, that's how I view that. And if it's the Lakers, first of all, I think you hit on it, Justin. That'd be so much fun if that
Yeah.
if that was the finals matchup. But I just don't think
second year in a row of picking apart Luka Doncic in the finals. Bring it on. Bring it on.
He was their best offensive player in the finals. That's the Celtics, that is. If they got him in the action, they were scoring. Like, he was their best offensive weapon.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
I mean, you look. I totally lost my. I lost my train of thought. I was just about to mention something. I mean, going back to the whole experience thing, it's like you look at those. I mean, really, you could have gone all 4 games, maybe 3 games, except the exception of game 2, but like definitely game 1 where Celtics were down 5 against Indiana with like 10 seconds left and back-to-back turnovers for Indiana. It's like they are like a year away from experience, and they lose that game. And they probably lose those other 2 games too. Like Indiana, just those minimal mistakes. And they might,
you know what?
You know what? Go ahead.
Sorry. No, just like, going back to other Justin's point here about, Indiana and them probably being the toughest matchup. If you see them again, I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk this time. They've been there before. They're going to have that experience a little bit more. So obviously I don't look at Indiana as a threat, right? Do I think Indiana can beat Boston? No, absolutely not. They're not in the same tier as us. However, right, I think what I 100% agree with you is like, okay, you look at Indiana, it's like that could be, I could see a world where Indiana gets hot, they make some big plays, they match up well, and you look and you find yourself in a game 6 situation where it's a close game in the fourth quarter and you got to make a couple plays to win the game. So it's like, I love that pick. I think Indiana's really underlooked right now in the whole, scope of the NBA. I don't think it's Cleveland, guys. I don't think I would be shocked, and I'll stay with that word, shocked, if we match up with Cleveland in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Really?
I would be, oh, absolutely. You look in the biggest turn for them, right? Obviously, too, Justin, you had it right. Injuries, they were hurt kind of all last year. Garland went down and then Mobley went down. I feel like one thing after another, but really it's been Kenny Atkinson in my eyes, right? That hiring has kind of allowed them to kind of unlock that too, because they do have some two-way versatility. It just comes from 2 different points of their roster with their centers and their guards, but they're kind of the same team that you saw crumble in the second round, and you are what your record says you are. And I look at a player like Donovan Mitchell, and yes, he's had some postseason individual success. I haven't seen this guy go through a playoff series or a playoff run and really do it. So I look at it from a star standpoint, and I don't think Donovan now, in year 8, I don't think he's got the track record. And you match up in the second round against a potential Milwaukee team who, again, experience, I think Milwaukee could take that, or an Indiana team. It's just, I don't think this is Cleveland's year. I think this is like 2015 Atlanta, although I believe Atlanta got there. But I don't think, I think this Cleveland team is fool's gold, guys. I do.
We don't have to go through your whole playoff bracket now, but say the standings stay as they are, Celtics stay the 2 seed, Cleveland stays the 1 seed. We wouldn't match up with them in the second round. And you don't think we match up against them in the Eastern Conference Finals. So who takes down the Cavs in your mind?
So right now, 4 is Indiana, 5 is Milwaukee. One of those 2 teams, I think, got it over them, and I think you saw that's the framework right now with the East. It's the Celtics, and then the rest of the field is like right here with each other. They're all neck and neck. It's a lot closer than people think. So sure, could they? Is there a world they do knock out one of those 4 or 5 seeds? Sure, but I mean, it's close. It's close, man, and I don't look at that team and think, oh, they're the over. Like, no, man, it's really, really, really close with Cleveland, and they got to prove it.